Hello, and welcome to Mindbend Facts. The majestic St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican City, a global icon of faith and history, is far more than meets the eye. What you see standing proudly today is merely the tip of an astonishing historical iceberg. Beneath its grand foundations lies a labyrinth of forgotten structures, each layer telling a story older and more mysterious than the last. This impressive edifice was built upon an even older basilica, dating back to the time of Emperor Constantine, and that, in turn, rests upon an ancient necropolis, literally a city of the dead, a vast funerary complex predating Christianity itself. All of this, incredibly, remains preserved beneath the modern basilica, with its central axis believed by some to be none other than the tomb of the Apostle Peter. In this video, we're going to descend through these subterranean layers, peeling back centuries of history to examine the deepest parts of this incredible story. We'll analyze the main arguments for and against the idea that St. Peter's Basilica was truly built over the body of Peter. Prepare to have your mind bent as we uncover the hidden truths beneath one of the world's most sacred sites. But before we dive into these ancient secrets, if you're as fascinated by the unexplained and the intriguing as we are, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments below where you're watching from and what mind-bending topic you'd like us to explore in our next video. Your feedback helps us uncover more incredible facts. To begin our journey into the Vatican's hidden past, we need to rewind to at least the 8th century BC, when Rome was still a modest town nestled on the banks of the Tiber River. At this time, what we now call the Vatican was not yet considered part of the burgeoning city. In fact, it was an area across the Tiber, part of a larger region known as the Ager Vaticanus, or the Vatican Field. This region, often described as a flat plain, bordered by hills, was distinct from the bustling, densely populated urban core of ancient Rome, which was growing on the opposite bank. It was a liminal space outside the sacred boundary of the Pomerium, the city's religious and legal boundary. The origin of the name Vatican itself is shrouded in some mystery, a linguistic puzzle that even ancient scholars debated. It might derive from vates, meaning prophet or soothsayer, suggesting a place where oracles or prophecies were delivered, perhaps due to some ancient cult or shrine. Another theory links it to an Etruscan term, given the significant Etruscan influence in early Roman history, as Etruscan settlements predated Roman expansion in the region. Some ancient sources, though not many, even mention a minor Roman deity called Deus Vaticanus, a god associated with the first cry of a newborn baby, believed to open the mouth and allow speech, connecting the place to the very act of utterance. However, even in antiquity, the etymology of this name was controversial and debated, so we can't be entirely certain why the region acquired it. This ambiguity only adds to the Vatican's inherent mystique. What we can be more certain of is that it was a largely undervalued area. It wasn't highly sought after by the ancient Romans for residential or agricultural purposes within the city's main development. Its geographical features contributed to this perception. For instance, the renowned Roman historian Tacitus, writing in the 1st century AD, vividly described the Vatican districts as unhealthy and pestilential lands. This wasn't just a casual observation. It implied that the area was prone to malaria and other diseases, likely due to its marshy conditions near the Tiber, making it undesirable for permanent settlement by the wealthy or even the general populace. The stagnant waters and dense vegetation created an environment ripe for disease vectors. Other sources also commented that the soil there wasn't very, further diminishing its appeal for large-scale cultivation or profitable farming, unlike the more fertile plains closer to the city. Because of these characteristics, its distance from the city center, its perceived insalubrity, and its poor soil, the Vatican became primarily known in antiquity for another purpose, one that did involve people interacting with the earth, but not in an agricultural sense. The Romans had a strict and deeply ingrained cultural practice, reinforced by stringent laws. They did not typically bury the dead within the city limits. This was explicitly forbidden by law, rooted in both pragmatic sanitary concerns to prevent disease and profound religious beliefs about purity and the sanctity of the living space. The famous laws of the 12 Tables, dating back to around 450 BC, contained a clear and unequivocal decree stating, neither bury nor burn a corpse within the city. This was a fundamental aspect of Roman urban planning, public health, and religious observance, a boundary between the living and the dead. So, what did they do? They buried the dead in more distant regions, following the course of the major roads that led out of Rome. These roads became arteries of funerary activity, lined with a diverse array of tombs, elaborate mausoleums, and columbaria, multi-niche structures for urns containing cremated remains. This practice created vast necropolises outside the city gates, sprawling cities of the dead that mirrored the social hierarchy of the living. One such vital road, the Via Cornelia, passed directly through the area of the present-day Vatican. Along this road, numerous tombs and mausoleums accumulated over time, belonging to both wealthy families, who spared no expense in building grand, multi-chambered monuments adorned with intricate frescoes, vibrant mosaics, and elegant sculptures to commemorate their lineage, and simpler burials for the common people, marked by humble stelae or inscriptions. These funerary structures ranged dramatically in size, complexity, and artistic embellishment, reflecting the diverse social strata of Roman society in their final resting places. With the passage of time, a veritable city of the dead, a sprawling necropolis, was established there, a silent testament to generations of Roman citizens. This is the first crucial detail about the pre-Christian Vatican that we need to understand. It was a place of death, a solemn, silent city dedicated to the departed, far removed from the vibrant life of Rome. Another very important detail about this ancient Vatican is that it also housed another famous and infamous structure in the 1st century AD, the Circus of Nero. This colossal structure, a testament to imperial ambition and public spectacle, was actually initiated by Emperor Caligula around 40 AD as a private property, primarily for chariot races, which he greatly enjoyed and often participated in. It was a massive arena, over 500 meters long, designed to accommodate tens of thousands of spectators for popular and often brutal spectacles. Later, Emperor Nero inherited this property and, with his penchant for grandiosity and cruelty, transformed the space into a venue for even more elaborate public spectacles, including not only thrilling races, but also gladiatorial contests and, infamously, public executions. It was a place of both entertainment and terror, a stage for imperial power, artistic expression, and horrifying brutality. According to some early Christian traditions, it was within this very arena, or in its immediate vicinity, that one of the individuals executed during Nero's persecutions was none other than the Apostle Peter, who, of course, gives his name to the current St. Peter's Basilica, supposedly built directly over his body. This alleged site of martyrdom and burial adds an incredibly profound and deeply moving layer of historical and religious significance to the Vatican's ancient landscape, transforming a place of death into a sacred ground. At this point, having laid the groundwork of the Vatican's ancient context, we can now properly delve into the traditions surrounding Peter's martyrdom and meticulously examine their point-by-point relationship with the current structures of the Vatican. Our investigation begins with the earliest available sources, the New Testament. In the New Testament texts, Peter is consistently presented as the most prominent, dynamic, and often outspoken among the 12 apostles. In the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he is invariably mentioned first in the list of apostles, a clear indication of his leadership role and preeminence among the disciples. He frequently acts as their spokesperson, demonstrating a fervent, if sometimes impulsive faith, and a willingness to step forward. He is also the first to make the pivotal confession of faith that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, a foundational moment in Christian theology that defines the very essence of belief. After Jesus' resurrection, Peter plays an undeniably central and foundational role in the beginning of Christian preaching and the establishment of the early church, as vividly depicted in the book of Acts of the Apostles, where he performs miracles, boldly proclaims the gospel, and guides the nascent community. And of course, there's another very important and often debated passage in the Gospel of Matthew, 16:18-19, where Jesus says to him, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, or hell, the underworld, will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. This passage has received various interpretations since the early centuries of Christianity, sparking theological debates that continue to this day, forming the basis for different understandings of ecclesiastical authority. However, it eventually became consolidated, at least in Western Catholicism, particularly from the 4th and 5th centuries, as a direct and powerful reference to the supreme apostolic authority of Peter and, by extension, of the bishops of Rome, who were seen as Peter's direct successors, inheriting his spiritual authority and the keys of the kingdom. This, of course, is intrinsically linked to the long and complex historical development of the figure of the Pope and the papacy, a topic so vast and intricate that it's best to leave that for a specific video, as the history is truly quite complicated and deserves its own deep dive. But returning to the traditions about Peter, another ancient and very important tradition concerns his death, specifically his martyrdom. In the New Testament itself, there's already a subtle but powerful prophetic reference to the apostles' martyrdom. At the end of the Gospel of John, 21:18-19, Jesus says to Peter, "Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." The text immediately clarifies that Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. While the text doesn't explicitly state the exact method of Peter's execution, other, slightly later Christian texts provide more vivid and specific details. Origen of Alexandria, a prominent early Christian scholar and theologian writing around 230 AD, states with remarkable clarity, Peter was crucified in Rome with his head downwards, as he himself had requested to suffer in a different way. This early and influential account suggests a deliberate and humble choice by Peter regarding his manner of death, distinguishing it from that of his Lord. Another significant and more dramatic source is a book called The Acts of Peter, an apocryphal text from the late 2nd century which, while not canonical, offers valuable insight into early Christian beliefs and traditions. This text provides a dramatic and detailed account of Peter's final moments, quoting him as saying to his executioners, "I implore you, executioners, crucify me thus, with my head downwards and not otherwise, and the reason for this I will tell to those who hear." From there, Peter delivers a long and eloquent discourse on the symbolism of the cross, relating his upside-down position to the theme of the fall and sin, suggesting a profound spiritual connection to humanity's fallen state and the reversal of sin through Christ. Here, the idea isn't that Peter felt unworthy to die in the same manner as Jesus, a more widely known version that suggests humility and reverence. That specific interpretation, that he didn't want to be crucified exactly as Jesus was and therefore requested to be crucified upside down out of humility, apparently only emerges between the 4th and 5th centuries AD, reflecting a later theological development. The first time it appears, or at least as far as I've found, is in a text by St. Jerome, a prolific church father, in which he says, "From the hands of Nero, Peter received the crown of martyrdom, being nailed to the cross with his head turned towards the ground and his feet raised upwards, declaring that he was not worthy to be crucified in the same manner as his Lord." It's interesting here that Nero appears in this account as Peter's direct executioner, solidifying his role in the apostles' death and linking Peter's martyrdom directly to the imperial persecutions. However, in the Acts of Peter, the older text, the prefect Agrippa is held responsible for the apostles' death, and Nero is even depicted as irritated with Agrippa for having killed Peter without informing the emperor, because, quote, Nero intended to punish him in an even more cruel and severe manner. This discrepancy highlights the evolving and sometimes conflicting nature of early Christian traditions and narratives, as different authors sought to interpret and record these foundational events. Regardless of these nuances in the narrative, the version that became consolidated over time and is widely accepted across Christian traditions is that Peter was indeed executed during Nero's reign, specifically during the brutal persecutions that followed the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, which Nero infamously blamed on the Christians. More precisely, the tradition places his martyrdom in or near Nero's circus, which, as we saw, was located in the Vatican. And it was there, near where he died, that the apostle was supposedly buried. This alleged site of burial is a key point for us, because several ancient sources indeed point to the Vatican as Peter's burial place, lending significant historical weight to the tradition that the apostles' earthly remains found their final resting place in this very spot. The ancient bishop and historian Eusebius of Caesarea, for example, writing in the mid-4th century, a crucial period for the consolidation of Christian history, quotes a letter from the presbyter Gaius from the early 3rd century, which stated, "I can show you the trophies of the apostles, for if you wish to go to the Vatican or to the Via Ostiensis, you will find the trophies of those who founded this church. These trophies or memorials refer to the revered tombs of Peter in the Vatican and of the Apostle Paul on the Via Ostiensis, a major Roman road, where the current Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls stands, supposedly marking the place of Paul's martyrdom." We'll return to this specific trophy of Peter mentioned by Gaius shortly. But for now, what's important is this ancient testimony that already in the early centuries of Christianity, there was a strong and widespread tradition, a deeply held belief, that Peter's body was interred in the Vatican, making it a sacred site long before the Grand Basilica was conceived. It is for this profound reason, rooted in centuries of tradition and veneration, that when Emperor Constantine, in the 4th century, embarked on his ambitious program to promote Christianity throughout the Roman Empire, transforming it from a persecuted sect into a favored and eventually official religion, and to construct monumental basilicas linked to the history of Jesus and the saints, he ordered a grand basilica to be built in honor of the Apostle Peter precisely there in the Vatican. This was not merely a religious act, but a monumental undertaking, not just in terms of its immense scale, but also in terms of the unprecedented engineering challenges it presented. The problem was that the traditional spot identified as Peter's tomb was located on a steep hillside that had long been used as a necropolis, as we've seen, vast, densely packed, and established funerary complex. This presented a significant impediment, both legally and architecturally. You couldn't simply violate existing tombs. It was strictly forbidden by Roman law and deeply disrespectful to the dead, a sacrilege. Furthermore, it was architecturally challenging, if not seemingly impossible, to construct a massive basilica, a work of grand engineering and monumental scale, on such an uneven and steep terrain as the Vatican region was. The site was far from ideal for such a colossal undertaking. But well, the man was the emperor, and his will was absolute, backed by the immense resources of the Roman Empire. So none of these challenges were deemed insurmountable. The brilliant engineers and countless laborers serving Emperor Constantine simply undertook an unprecedented feat of civil engineering. They meticulously cut into the Vatican Hill, effectively leveling a significant portion of the natural landscape, creating a vast flat expanse where none had existed before. The enormous volume of earth and debris removed from this monumental cut was then ingeniously used to fill the adjacent valley, transforming a natural depression into a solid, artificial plateau. This massive artificial platform, a testament to Roman engineering prowess and imperial determination, became the stable foundation upon which the old St. Peter's Basilica was then meticulously constructed. This first basilica, a truly awe-inspiring structure for its time, a symbol of the triumph of Christianity, was inaugurated around the year 326 AD, becoming an immediate and paramount pilgrimage site and a powerful symbol of the newly ascendant Christian faith within the heart of the Roman Empire. One very impressive aspect of this colossal work, which is impressive in its entirety, but one specific and truly mind-bending point, is that a large part of the pre-existing necropolis was remarkably preserved during the construction of the basilica. This was not an accident, but a deliberate and ingenious engineering decision. The highest part of the necropolis, directly in the path of the new foundation, was indeed completely destroyed to make way for the basilica's massive footprint, a necessary sacrifice. However, the tombs in the lower parts of the necropolis, particularly those closer to the presumed tomb of Peter, were not destroyed, but rather carefully filled in with earth and debris, creating a protective layer. With this ingenious method, they remained practically intact, preserved beneath the earth, complete with all their intricate frescoes, vibrant mosaics, delicate sculptures, and personal artifacts, a frozen snapshot of Roman funerary practices. All of this lay hidden, a silent city of the dead, directly beneath the new basilica, awaiting rediscovery centuries later. So, for more than 1,000 years, this first, deeply buried layer, the necropolis, remained largely forgotten and unseen, a subterranean secret, while the second layer, which was the old St. Peter's Basilica, stood majestically above, teeming with life, prayer, and visited by countless pilgrims from various parts of the world, unaware of the ancient world beneath their feet. However, this second layer, too, would eventually be covered by a third and even grander layer, which is the current and even more visited St. Peter's Basilica, a testament to changing architectural styles, evolving ambitions, and the enduring power of faith. To understand the emergence of this third and final layer, the magnificent basilica we see today, we need to jump forward in time to the beginning of the Renaissance, a period of immense artistic, architectural, and intellectual revival in Europe, characterized by a renewed interest in classical antiquity. In 1447, Pope Nicholas V began to consider a broad reform of St. Peter's Basilica, due to the accumulated wear and tear from centuries of use and neglect. The ancient basilica, though grand and historically significant, was showing its age, its structure compromised by time and the elements. But what actually happened was far more than a simple reform. It was a complete transformation, a radical reimagining of the sacred space. The person who truly made the radical and audacious decision to address the problems of the old basilica was the ambitious and visionary Pope Julius II in 1506. What he decided to do was, in fact, to completely demolish the ancient basilica, a shocking decision to many at the time, given its historical and religious significance, and construct a new, much larger, and far more grandiose one on top. This new design was to be in the characteristic style of the High Renaissance, which emphasized classical proportions, perfect symmetry, monumental scale, and a harmonious blend of art and architecture. This new basilica, the current one that dominates the Vatican skyline today and serves as the spiritual heart of the Catholic Church, was an undertaking of truly epic proportions. It required the genius of multiple legendary architects and artists, Bramante, Raphael, Michelangelo, and Bernini, among others, each contributing their vision to its design. It took over 120 years to be completed, a testament to its sheer size, the complexity of its design, and the numerous architectural and engineering challenges it presented, spanning multiple pontificates. It was finally consecrated only in 1626 by Pope Urban VIII, a moment of immense triumph and celebration for the Catholic world. This is the magnificent building we know today, adorned with the masterpieces of legendary artists, a symbol of enduring faith and monumental human achievement. So, the landscape we see in the Vatican today is practically just the tip of a colossal historical iceberg, a visible manifestation of layers upon layers of human endeavor and belief. Beneath its gleaming surface lies the stratum of the old basilica from Constantine's time, a testament to early Christian imperial power and the initial embrace of the faith. And even further down, about 10 to 12 meters below the floor of the new basilica, shrouded in darkness and history, lies the Vatican Necropolis, with its ancient, mostly non-Christian tombs and mausoleums, and some Christian ones too. Among these, some say, lies the very tomb of St. Peter, the foundational apostle. At this point, we can revisit the crucial question of Peter's trophy, the ancient memorial that has fueled centuries of debate and devotion. What happened is that during the construction of the old basilica, the builders working for Constantine made a remarkable discovery, a structure that was identified as Peter's trophy, the one mentioned by Gaius, and therefore also called Gaius's trophy. This structure was a kind of memorial niche, almost 3 meters high, between 2.5 and 3 meters, and 1.5 meters wide, meticulously crafted from bricks against a distinctive red wall. All of this was in the typical style of Roman funerary structures from the 2nd or 3rd century AD, indicating its age and purpose. Because of the perceived connection of this structure to the Apostle Peter, This niche was not only carefully preserved during the construction of the old basilica, but it also served as the central axis around which the entire basilica building was meticulously planned, a sacred focal point. The main altar of the basilica was even built exactly above the trophy, making it the spiritual and architectural heart of the entire complex. Centuries later, when the ambitious Pope Julius II ordered the construction of the new basilica in the 16th century, the visionary Renaissance architects also made sure to preserve this sacred structure, and they built the new main altar also perfectly aligned with it, maintaining the ancient focal point and ensuring continuity. And to complete this monumental spiritual axis, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, the brilliant 17th century sculptor and architect, created that impressive bronze structure, the Baldachin of St. Peter, which is still there today, majestically marking this symbolic point. The four twisted columns of the baldachin rise exactly from the point where Gaius's trophy is located, which in turn is above a grave in the ancient Necropolis where bones were found that some believe to be Peter's bones. Now, the central mind-bending question, the one that has captivated historians, archaeologists, and believers for centuries, is, are these really Peter's bones? Is this truly the tomb of the Apostle Peter, the foundational figure of the Catholic Church, whose legacy continues to shape billions of lives? Let's now meticulously analyze the arguments in favor, and then the arguments against this idea, delving deeply into the archaeological and historical evidence that has been unearthed and debated. We can start with an argument that has already been anticipated in this video, one that provides an early textual link. There is a textual source from the 4th century, Eusebius of Caesarea's Ecclesiastical History, a foundational work of early church history, which quotes a lost 3rd century source, the text by the presbyter Gaius, mentioning a memorial to Peter in the Vatican. This early reference is highly significant because it indicates a pre-Constantinian tradition, a belief existing before the imperial endorsement of Christianity. And indeed, a memorial was found during the meticulous 1940s excavations, the so-called Trophy of Peter, or Trophy of Gaius, which physically matches this ancient reference. This correlation between an ancient text and a tangible archaeological discovery is a strong point for proponents, suggesting a continuity of tradition. However, this could have been a memorial to anyone else too, since there is no name explicitly engraved on it, nor any specific symbol that unequivocally points to the figure of Peter, or an apostle, or even a Christian or a Jew. The memorial's general Roman funerary style, while consistent with the period, doesn't inherently confirm its specific dedication to Peter, leaving room for alternative interpretations. But against these lingering doubts, we could introduce a second, favorable argument, one that brings us closer to direct evidence. On the walls directly adjacent to the structure identified as Peter's trophy, there are several ancient inscriptions, including some with clear Christian symbols. One of these inscriptions, according to the meticulous and highly publicized work of archaeologist Margherita Guarducci, a key figure in the Vatican excavations, reads, Petros Ini, meaning Peter is here in Greek. While it's impossible to date this inscription with absolute precision, its presence in such close proximity to the memorial, coupled with its Greek language, which was common among early Roman Christians, many of whom spoke Greek, and its clear Christian context, makes it highly plausible that it is a testimony that Christians in the early centuries, perhaps even as early as the 2nd century, already believed that Peter was buried there. This would suggest a continuous and localized veneration of the site. Now, of course, a critical perspective might suggest they could have been mistaken too. This could have been a false tomb, perhaps, or a symbolic memorial rather than an actual burial site, a place where Peter was remembered rather than interred. And to further strengthen that doubt, we could go to the third and most compelling favorable argument, involving the physical remains themselves. In 1942, under the direct and personal supervision of Pope Pius XIV, extensive excavations were carried out at the site to prepare a tomb for the recently deceased Pope Pius XIII. These Vatican grottos were already being used for the burial of some popes, but these new excavations went deeper, into previously unexplored layers. During these crucial excavations for Pius XIII's burial, the ancient Roman necropolis was somewhat rediscovered, a forgotten world beneath the basilica, revealing its long-hidden secrets. Archaeologists then spent the next 10 years meticulously excavating this spot beneath St. Peter's Basilica, revealing its secrets layer by layer. One truly significant thing discovered during this period was bone fragments found in a cavity directly adjacent to the Red Wall, very close to the trophy of Peter. These fragments were later examined by an anthropologist from the University of Palermo in the 1960s, a crucial scientific step. The conclusion of this analysis was compelling. The fragments belonged to a single individual, a robust man of strong build, who would have died between 60 and 70 years old. This profile, describing a sturdy fisherman from Galilee dying in old age, would indeed fit remarkably well with the expected profile of Peter, aligning with historical accounts of his life and presumed age at death. And there's more. This analysis, conducted in the 1960s, also found that these bones originally had been carefully covered by a precious purple cloth, interwoven with delicate gold threads. This detail strongly indicates that they belonged to someone considered very important, perhaps even venerated, suggesting a reverence consistent with an apostle's remains, a sign of profound respect and sanctity. Well, the favorable arguments, when taken together, seem quite strong, don't they? They weave together textual tradition, archaeological discovery, and scientific analysis into a compelling narrative. So, what are the counter-arguments? The reasons to doubt that these are truly Peter's bones, and why does the debate persist? The first counter-argument is that, in reality, the readings made of the inscriptions near Gaius's trophy are unfortunately not as conclusive as some proponents suggest. Not all scholars at the time of the discovery, nor do they today, agree with the interpretations made by Margherita Guarducci of these inscriptions. The archaeological community is often divided on such matters, and definitive consensus is rare. Archaeologist Antonio Ferrua, for example, who was a prominent figure and participated in the original excavations of the site, was notably and consistently skeptical about the Petros Eni reading. As a historian named John Walsh, who wrote an interesting book on this very subject, stated, "There has been much discussion surrounding this claim that the inscription actually says, 'Peter is here,' and several scholars have expressed strong disagreement. The materials themselves are too fragile and tenuous to allow a definitive decision. This highlights the inherent difficulty in definitively interpreting ancient, often fragmentary and worn inscriptions, where a slight variation in a mark can change its meaning entirely. But it must be said, and he includes his opinion here, that Dr. Guarducci's theory does indeed seem quite plausible, implying it's a strong possibility but still not an absolute certainty. Even so, even if we were to concede for the sake of argument that the inscription actually says, 'Peter is here,' this would simply prove that someone, whom we don't know exactly at some point, whom we don't know exactly when, believed this to be true, or at least wanted others to believe it was true. It doesn't inherently prove the physical presence of Peter's remains. So this inscription alone is by no means sufficient proof, not by a long shot, that Peter is or was physically buried there. So, the first problem is this inherent uncertainty regarding the inscriptions themselves and their interpretation. A second, and perhaps more significant, problem has to do with the crucial issue of the bone fragments themselves and their chain of custody, a critical aspect in archaeological verification. When excavations began in the area of Peter's trophy in the 1940s, bone fragments were indeed found, as we saw, in a cavity directly adjacent to the red wall that forms the backdrop for Peter's trophy. However, the initial analysis of these specific bones indicated that they belonged to several different people, including even some animal remains, suggesting a mixed burial or a disturbed context, which complicates their identification. It was only later, years after the initial discovery, that a separate box with bones supposedly removed from the site came to light. These were the bones that were then analyzed in the 1960s and resulted in the profile of the robust man in the 60-70 age range. The critical issue here is that these specific bone fragments, which today are considered by some as the relics of St. Peter, actually have a much more dubious origin than archaeologists would prefer for definitive proof. They were not found in situ, as it is said in archaeology. In situ means in place, referring to an artifact or bone found exactly in its original undisturbed position of deposition, allowing for precise contextual analysis and verification. These were not bones that the professional archaeologists found directly at the location, meticulously recorded the context of the discovery, and then carefully transported for analysis following strict scientific protocols. Instead, they were bones obtained from a box that had been guarded by a Vatican official for years. This official claimed he had received these bones from another Vatican official who supposedly, at night, in the absence of the professional excavators, had removed the bones from the original location to place them in a more protected spot, as he understood it. So it's a very confusing story, fraught with ambiguities, hearsay, and lacking the rigorous archaeological documentation crucial for definitive proof. This narrative is also complicated by known rivalries between key figures involved, such as Antonio Ferrua and Margherita Guarducci, rivalries that sometimes involve disputes over positions of power, prestige, and academic backing, potentially influencing interpretations. So there's a great cloud, a lot of noise surrounding this entire story, which, whether we like it or not, significantly reduces the weight these bones have as proper archaeological or historical evidence. The lack of a clear, unbroken chain of custody for these specific bones is a major point of contention for skeptics. And another crucial point, even if we were to set aside all the issues of provenance and interpretation, even if none of these issues existed, even if these bones had been collected perfectly, with 100% confirmed provenance directly from Peter's trophy, and they belonged to a man with a certain physical profile and age, this would still not be sufficient to definitively prove that this man was Peter. It could have been any robust Roman man of that time, between 60 and 70 years old, who happened to be buried in that necropolis. While the profile fits, it's not unique. So all the favorable evidence, while intriguing and supportive of the tradition, is either inherently uncertain or very indirect. It points to a strong belief that Peter was there, and a long-standing veneration of the site, but not necessarily to the fact of his physical presence, through irrefutable scientific means. The fact is that not even the Catholic Church has a final dogmatic position on this matter, reflecting the nuanced nature of the evidence. In the late 1960s, Pope Paul VI, in the context of these analyses and investigations, did make a public speech stating that Peter's remains had been identified in a convincing manner. This was a significant statement made with great solemnity, but it carefully used the word convincing rather than certain or definitive. So even he doesn't claim absolute certainty. He doesn't officially or dogmatically define it as an undeniable truth, but he says he believed the analysis results were convincing, a statement of faith and strong probability rather than absolute proof. However, as we've seen, the defense that these bones are truly those of the Apostle Peter ultimately relies more on faith and the long-standing tradition of the Church than purely on irrefutable scientific or archaeological evidence that would satisfy all academic criteria. What can be said with a little more certainty, and without the slightest shadow of a doubt from an archaeological perspective, is that the excavations undeniably confirm that Christians in the early centuries believed Peter was buried there, and they clearly venerated that specific spot with memorials and inscriptions. This historical belief and practice are well documented, but archaeology, by its very nature and limitations, can confirm belief and practice, but it cannot definitively prove that those beliefs were factually correct regarding the precise identity of the buried individual. So, regardless of whether the remains are Peter's or not, the profound fact remains. The trophy from the ancient necropolis did indeed serve as the main axis for the construction of one of the most important and enduring monuments in the history of Christianity, St. Peter's Basilica. This magnificent structure today symbolizes a Vatican very different from that of pre-Christian times, which was a marginal, unhealthy, and very undervalued field. Today, on the contrary, the Vatican stands as a global center of immense spiritual and temporal power, vast wealth, and, of course, an unparalleled repository of history, built upon layers of forgotten pasts. Just that ancient obelisk in the center of St. Peter's Square, a silent, weathered witness to millennia of history, would make a video on its own, and it actually already has, which we recommend watching next. And that's it for this mind-bending journey beneath the Vatican. As always, we'll leave the references and sources in the video description for anyone who wants to delve deeper into the subject. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and impressions in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.